Hi, and welcome to Blackwall. I want to talk about Blackwall as a place and as an area, and a little bit about the history and how that fits in with what we're doing here at the Steamship. It's a really old area, and London, of course, is a really old city, but this area, the Deep East, wasn't part of the ancient city of London. It was wilderness for a really long time. But by the 14th century, we know there was already a place called Blackwall, which obviously there was a wall and stairs that led down into the Thames. And it seems as though that this was the beginning of the London dock area. By the 16th century, we start to see that it was really a fully developed dockland. And there was a lot of ships going, obviously, to other parts of Europe and eventually to the New World. An interesting connection for me is that this is the site where the explorer Martin Frobisher left to go to find the Northwest Passage. And when he got there, or what he thought was the Northwest Passage, he claimed that land for the Kingdom of England. And actually, that was the beginning of the colonization of the territory, which later became Canada. And so as a Canadian person, it's a bit of an interesting connection. Of course, the colonial connection of the Docklands and the rest of the world is a seam that we could mine forever, really. We see the Docklands developing for a good few hundred years through the 16th, 17th, and into the 18th century. But in the 19th century, the whole territory was really highly developed. The East India Dock was developed in order to take advantage of the colonization of India. And the area actually became quite prosperous for a while. It was known for fancy inns and some quite nice houses as well. None of that exists now. You can walk around and you won't really see any of that. A lot of really interesting buildings, but none of that. By the end of the 19th century, though, this whole area started to go into decline. Charles Booth's survey of London, who was trying to map all the sort of poverty zones in London, describes Blackwall as a place where the poorest and most wretched people lived. And that seemed to be this sort of the problem with the area. It completely decayed. And that's why they decided they were going to build the Blackwall Tunnel, and so they just swept away all the remnants of the medieval and the 16th, 17th century dock area. I suppose there's probably a lot of archaeological remains under the ground here, but there's not much to see above ground from that previous time. In the 20th century, the history is an interesting one of up and down. We know that the Docklands area was bombed a lot during the Second World War. It was the main recipient of the bombing. And so after the war, quite a lot of people that lived in this Dockland area had to be rehoused outside of London. But they did rebuild the docks in the 1950s, and the Docklands was well on its way to get back to prosperity. But then containerization happened. So all the shipping that used to come here moved down the river to Tilbury, where there's still a big container port. And then you get this question, what do you do with a huge area that's no longer functional? So there's quite a lot of industry, but nothing really took place here. The people who'd been working in the docks ended up just unemployed. And then in the 1980s, under the Thatcher government, there was the idea to regenerate the whole area. Now, this is where the whole process of art and regeneration comes in and becomes very interesting. Because unlike in other parts of London, of East London, like Hackney and Bethnal Green, Hackney Wick, Hoxton, where a lot of the regeneration in those areas has been really artist-led. So artists move into an area, take over the old warehouses, make a lot of happenings and art spaces, and then the developers move in. That has happened a lot less out here. So most of the regeneration process we've seen in the Docklands, and which you see as you walk around Blackwall, is really developer-led. So things have been torn down, and then just blocks and blocks of flats have been put up. What's weird about it is it don't seem to have much culture or many amenities. So you could see like rows of big blocks of flats and maybe one mini supermarket. And it's a bit strange and ghostly when you wander around. But I think that it also makes a place like the Steamship very interesting. It's called the Steamship, but it's also a little bit like a spaceship. It's sort of like plopped down with all its history. This is a really antique building. It represents a period of this area that's long gone. And there's all this artistic activity taking place, but it's not in the service of regeneration. Regeneration is happening out there, but what everybody's doing here is something else. It's much more about exploring the geography and the fabric of the territory, taking from it, using it, and then putting it back. And so in that case, it's really quite interesting. When I walk around Blackwall and I see all these new developments, it reminds me of a scene in the great film The Holy Mountain by Alejandro Jodorowsky, where in this scene, the character of the architect, he goes into this meeting with all these investors and he shows them his plan for workers' housing. And it's actually like a sort of a maquette with a lot of little coffins all arranged in a sort of high-rise. And he's explaining, oh, well, you know, the people, they come from the factory, and then they come home, and they just get into this unit, which is a coffin, and then they go to sleep, and they get up in the morning, and they go out. And I can't help but feel that a lot of these developments have that same feeling. Hopefully it's not actually like that for the people that live there. But that's why it's so exciting to walk through all of that, and then come here and see life actually happening, people living and working and making art and talking about art and bringing people here usually. And then, you know, the idea is that whatever we do here, you know, this is temporary, but we'll take some of it away with us when we go.